Russia's largest e-commerce platform was supposed to be untouchable. With over 200 warehouses spread across the country, Wildberries had built an empire so embedded in daily Russian life that the Kremlin treated it like critical national infrastructure. Then, on the night of July 18, 2026, Ukrainian drones arrived over Elektrostal, just east of Moscow. And the question that matters now is simple: how deep does the damage actually run? Ukrainian long-range drones destroyed two massive warehouses belonging to Wildberries, Russia's largest online retailer, overnight into Saturday, July 18, 2026, killing at least 8 people and wounding more than 60 in what regional officials describe as the deadliest Ukrainian strikes inside Russia in over 2 years. The fires burned for hours. The smoke was visible from central Moscow, and it was only the beginning. Wildberries, often described as Russia's Amazon, is one of the country's biggest employers. The company currently accounts for 52% of all online orders in Russia, according to leading analyst Sergei Semko of Moscow-based research firm Data Insight. That's not a retailer. That's the circulatory system of Russia's consumer economy, and Ukraine just put a blade in it. The Elektrostal warehouse in the Moscow region is one of the company's largest logistics centers, covering more than 360,000 square meters and employing over 8,000 people. The Kotovsk Logistics Center in Tambov was opened last year and is designed to store up to 54 million products. Both of them burned to the ground within the same night. That's 2 of Russia's most critical distribution nodes wiped off the map in a single operation. So what exactly was Ukraine hitting, and why does the Kremlin's official explanation fall completely apart under scrutiny? Following the July 18th strike, President Volodymyr Zelensky said the logistics centers were supporting the Russian military, calling them Russian logistics facilities, specifically warehouses used to supply war materiel, navigation equipment, components for drone production, and other supplies for the Russian army. The Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov denied it, but the evidence on Wildberries' own platform tells a different story. Dual-use items were listed on Wildberries' online platform, including body armor, combat helmets, camouflage clothing, and fiber optic cable used in drones. Wildberries also lists a variety of military equipment available for purchase on its website, including drone components and body armor. This isn't a coincidence. It's a business model, and Ukraine decided to charge a different kind of price for it. The Financial Times Kyiv correspondent Christopher Miller, citing a senior Ukrainian official, reported on July 18th that the attacks on Wildberries were retaliation for Russian strikes on Nova Poshta, Ukraine's largest private courier service. In June, Nova Poshta Chief Executive Officer Yevhen Tafichuk said a Russian missile attack had destroyed the company's largest and most innovative terminal. Kyiv was sending a message: if Russia burns Ukraine's logistics, Ukraine burns Russia's. By July 24th, it was already the 3rd overnight attack by Ukraine on Wildberries sites in the space of 1 week. The strikes weren't random. They were systematic, methodical, and they were spreading. Over the weekend of July 18th, Ukrainian drones hit Wildberries distribution centers in Elektrostal in the Moscow region and Kotovsk in the Tambov region. A second wave of attacks early Wednesday hit logistics warehouses in the Krasnodar and Stavropol regions, while state media in the southwestern Voronezh region also reported that a drone strike forced the closure of a Wildberries warehouse there late Wednesday into Thursday. On Friday, Ukrainian missile and drone producer Firepoint said Ukrainian FP-1 drones struck 2 additional Wildberries logistics hubs in Russia: the Shushary Logistics Complex in St. Petersburg and the Utkina Zavod facility in Leningrad region, and the company's Simferopol logistics hub in Russian-occupied Crimea. That last one stings differently. Crimea was supposed to be safely behind Russian lines. An AFP reporter saw gray smoke rising into the morning sky over high-rise buildings in St. Petersburg, which is more than 800 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. Think about what that distance means operationally. Ukraine is hitting a city that Vladimir Putin considers his hometown, over 500 miles from the front line, using cheap, domestically produced drones. The psychological impact alone is staggering. The FP-1 drone, built by Ukrainian manufacturer Firepoint, is now the weapon rewriting how this war is being fought at depth. According to Firepoint Chief Executive Officer Irina Terek, Producing the Flamingo missile costs nearly 6 times less than a comparable imported alternative. Ukraine is inflicting billion-dollar damage at a fraction of the cost. That's the arithmetic that should terrify Moscow's planners. Now here's where the story gets truly alarming, because the strikes didn't stop at warehouses. Zelensky confirmed that Ukraine's long-range strikes successfully hit logistics centers in the Krasnodar and Stavropol regions, calling them facilities involved in supplying the Russian army with drone components, navigation equipment, and other military hardware. And he added that a tanker and 4 dry cargo vessels from Russia's Shadow Fleet were also struck in the Black and Azov Seas. This is a multi-domain squeeze. The warehouses burn on land, and the Shadow Fleet, Russia's mechanism for evading oil sanctions, bleeds at sea simultaneously. If you want to understand how this plays out and what it means for Russia's ability to keep fighting, subscribe now, because the financial fallout from these strikes goes several layers deeper than the fires themselves, and that's exactly what we're about to get into. By July 24th, at least 9 Wildberries warehouses had been hit over 4 days in the course of 1 week. Moscow-based analytics firm Data Insight estimated the losses in merchandise alone at 170 billion rubles, equivalent to roughly $2.2 billion, and that number keeps climbing. Data Insight analyst Sergei Semko estimated that the strikes had damaged between 12 and 15% of Wildberries' total warehouse space, and that losses of goods could reach as high as approximately $3 billion. $3 billion. That's not a setback for one company. That's a shock to Russia's entire retail nervous system. By July 22nd, after only the first few attacks, Ukraine had already knocked out an estimated 8% of Wildberries' total logistics capacity, with physical damage to the warehouses alone estimated at around $400 million. Sellers' losses from destroyed inventory could reach another $2 billion, little of which the sellers can recover. The Russian internet filled with desperate appeals from small and medium-sized business owners who lost merchandise worth hundreds of millions of dollars in the destroyed warehouses. Some lost everything. One of them even took his own life. These aren't oligarchs absorbing a bad quarter. These are the hundreds of thousands of small traders whose livelihoods ran through Wildberries' network, and they're watching it burn. Last year, Wildberries founder Tatiana Kim said the company had more than 200 facilities, totaling over 5.2 million square meters, with plans to expand in 2026, including planned warehouses in Belarus and Kazakhstan. Those expansion plans now look like a cruel irony. Russian analysts estimated the total economic damage caused by the attacks at up to 100 billion rubles, making it one of the costliest strikes on Russia's commercial infrastructure since the start of the war. Restoring the damaged facilities is expected to cost up to 35.8 billion rubles, roughly $457 million, a bill that insurance companies are unlikely to fully cover, according to experts cited by the Kommersant newspaper. Then there's the banking dimension, and this is the thread that could unravel something much larger. On July 27th, Firepoint co-founder and chief designer Denis Stillerman stated that Wildberries' partnership with Russian state-controlled VTB Bank made it a prime strategic target, arguing that, since Wildberries was the largest borrower in Russia, its collapse would result in several banks, including VTB, facing severe financial strain. The company's sheer size will have other ripple effects across the Russian economy, including damage to the banks holding its substantial debt. Wildberries' annual turnover exceeds 4 trillion rubles, or roughly $30 to $35 billion, accounting for more than 10% of all domestic trade in Russia. When a company of that weight starts bleeding, the damage doesn't stay contained to its own balance sheet. Wildberries was estimated to have over 200 warehouses and logistics centers across the Russian Federation, which were practically impossible to protect completely from cheap Ukrainian drones with expensive Russian air defense systems. This is the asymmetry that makes the campaign so potent. Russia can't afford to station air defense batteries at every major warehouse in a network this vast. Ukraine's FP-1 drones cost a fraction of what a Russian interceptor missile costs. Every time Russia tries to shoot one down, it's spending more money than the drone itself is worth. On July 25th, a strike on a Wildberries warehouse in Yekaterinburg occurred in the morning. According to Wildberries, the warehouse itself was missed, and operations resumed 4 hours later, though footage suggests the parking lot was hit. On July 29th, Wildberries facilities were struck in Tushevo, Ryazan Oblast. That's not a campaign, that's a siege. On July 29th, smoke rose as firefighters worked to extinguish a fire at a Wildberries logistics hub in the Ryazan region, following a Ukrainian drone attack, with at least 6 people reportedly injured. Ryazan sits well over 500 kilometers from the front line. The map of this conflict has been fundamentally redrawn. Now, it's important to engage honestly with the counter-argument here, because it exists and it deserves a direct answer. The Kremlin and Wildberries both deny the military supply chain accusation. There is no publicly confirmed evidence that the company cooperates with Russia's defense ministry. Wildberries founder Tatiana Kim framed the attacks as strikes against ordinary workers doing ordinary jobs. And the deaths of night shift employees at Elektrostal are a real and terrible fact of this campaign. The civilian economic disruption is genuine. There's also a resilience argument. Wildberries operates with more than 200 facilities across the country, meaning even an extended campaign hasn't come close to a full knockout. The company still functions, deliveries still move. Russia's consumer economy hasn't collapsed. But here's where that counter case runs into its own wall. Analysts cited by the BBC said repeated strikes on major logistics hubs could force Russian retailers to decentralize warehouse operations, increase security spending, and drive up logistics costs across the sector. Decentralization doesn't mean resilience. It means higher costs, slower throughput, and a degraded supply chain that taxes the entire economy. That's a pressure that compounds with every strike. Ukraine's long-range drone attacks, including the strikes on e-commerce warehouses, have undercut the Kremlin's efforts to shield most Russian citizens from the war. That's perhaps the most strategically important sentence in this entire story. Putin's social contract with his population has rested on a single premise: that the war stays in Ukraine. The Russian state's response to the attacks was predictable. State media simply ignored them, and on July 24, police in Krasnodar detained a 19-year-old woman simply for posting video of the aftermath of the strike on the city's Wildberries facility. When a government starts arresting people for sharing footage of a burning shop, it's not projecting control, it's confessing to fear. The e-commerce giant accounts for almost 50% of Russia's online retail market, and dramatic videos of huge fires engulfing logistics centers in several parts of Russia have emerged all week, with 7 warehouses hit since the weekend. Millions of ordinary Russian consumers have watched those videos. They know their online orders are at risk. They know the war is now burning things they personally depend on. That's a political reality the Kremlin can't contain with a media blackout. United States President Donald Trump appeared to give his backing to Ukraine's counterattacks on Russia, calling the strikes an escalation that can lead to an end. That framing is significant. It signals Washington isn't asking Kyiv to pull back. The strikes are being read internationally as legitimate economic pressure, not terrorism. Wildberries, whose banking arm had sanctions imposed on it by the European Union this week over its financial contribution to the Russian budget, plays a central role in Russia's consumer economy. The European Union moved on sanctions at almost exactly the moment Ukrainian drones were moving on warehouses. That's coordinated pressure from 2 directions, kinetic and financial, landing on the same target within days of each other. Ukraine's drone attacks on Russia's biggest online retailer have ratcheted up pressure on Moscow's wartime economy, with Kyiv seeking to force Putin back to the negotiating table after nearly 4.5 years of war. Ukraine has been targeting major logistics centers as part of a push to severely disrupt the country's supply chains and increase the financial burden facing Russian banks and businesses. It marks a significant change in approach for Ukrainian forces, following months of long-range drone strikes targeting Russian energy infrastructure. The campaign has a logic to it that's worth spelling out clearly. First came the refineries. Ukraine's drones cut into Russia's energy production capacity throughout 2025 and into 2026. Then came the shadow fleet. The tankers that Russia used to smuggle oil revenues past Western sanctions were hit at sea. Now come the warehouses, the civilian military logistics web that ties Russia's war economy to its consumer economy. Each layer of attack targets a different pressure point, and each one forces Russia to defend a wider surface area with resources it's already stretching thin. The strikes are reportedly part of a broader strategy to disrupt Russia's supply chains and support networks, which includes sites crucial for drone components navigation equipment, and military cargo. Ukraine isn't improvising. It's executing a campaign architecture designed to make the cost of war materially felt by everyone inside Russia, from soldiers missing equipment on the front line to consumers missing deliveries at home. What happens next is genuinely unresolved. The Kremlin has threatened harder retaliation, and Moscow has refused to compromise its hardline demands that Ukraine permanently cede territory it still controls. While the Kremlin has said the Ukrainian strikes make it more determined to prosecute the war and threaten to seize more land in the east and south. That's not the language of a government feeling the pressure and reaching for the exit. But governments have said things like that before, and then done something very different when the economic pain became impossible to absorb. The deeper question is whether destroying Russia's Amazon actually degrades its ability to fight, or whether it only radicalizes a population that's already been told Ukraine is the enemy. The military-civilian dual-use argument is real, and the FP1 drone campaign is genuinely cheap relative to its impact. But the line between a legitimate military target and an economy-wide pressure campaign is a line Ukraine is now deliberately blurring, and that has consequences that will play out well beyond the next warehouse fire. What do you think? Does Ukraine's campaign against Wildberries represent a legitimate military strategy that accelerates a Russian reckoning? Or does bringing the war into Russian consumers' lives risk hardening public opinion in ways that extend the conflict rather than end it? And if Russia's financial system starts buckling under the combined weight of warehouse losses, banking exposure, and sanctions, does that force Putin to negotiate? Or does it lock him into a corner where he can't afford to? Tell me what you think in the comments below. If you want to keep watching as this unfolds, subscribe, because the next phase of Ukraine's deep strike campaign is already in motion, and the targets keep getting larger.